Well, I'd like to welcome all of you to Learning with Samford, and I'm honored that Brian Katulis of the Middle East Institute is going to be our first expert on the topic that my daughter Jessica and grandson Jackson have been discussing. And we always do these follow-ups with someone who really has some authority. I'm going to make Brian's introduction very short here. It can be a long one, but he is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute and has produced many influential studies, provided expert testimony to key congressional committees on his findings, and his research includes countries, well, actually the whole Middle East. And I cannot say enough about two things that he is involved in. One is your podcast, Taking the Edge Off of the Middle East. I do like that you have your drink. Unfortunately, I'm more of a teetotaler. So okay, I have Coke Zero. So we'll drink.
I have Diet Coke. It's only 2 in the afternoon, Don, okay?
All right, well, we're going to put the edge on the Middle East then.
All right, cool. That's good. More caffeine.
But I highly recommend that you go to his podcast. And then also, and he was kind enough to send me this morning, U.S. Policy in the Middle East, third quarter 2025 report card. He does a quarterly assessment of the administration's regional foreign policy, and I cannot say enough high praise for it. So those are two things I encourage our viewers to take a look at. So Brian, welcome.
Thanks for having me on. It's great to see you again. And thanks, you hosted me in the spring, and it was just so much fun to get out there and meet with folks. So it's great to reconnect.
Well, we're hopeful to get you back here to Central Illinois sometime in the future here as well.
Excellent.
Well, a lot to cover just on Israel Palestine. I wanted to get your thoughts on the conditions of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, which we've seen some things play out. We've seen the release of the living hostages. We still have the issue with those who have died and the issue of how feasible it is going to get those bodies. We also know the yellow line. Israel has pulled back to that area, but I think there's some issues with aid. So can you share with us kind of what the current status is of the ceasefire agreement?
It's still holding, but it's still quite tenuous for some of the factors that you highlighted, as well as a few others. One, the understanding of this ceasefire was built around the 20 points principles, more or less. It's less of a plan and more of a set of principles that President Trump put out at the end of September. And in addition to some questions about rules of engagement for the Israel Defense Forces and some incidents that continue to occur inside of Gaza, and whether on the Israeli side of the yellow line or inside of Palestinian territory. There are concerns about Hamas and whether or not it will actually disarm. That was a key understanding in Trump's 20-point plan. I think it's going to be very difficult for that to happen anytime soon. But the more immediate issues of aid delivery, it seems that the situation has improved for many Palestinians, but it's still not where it should be. And another sticking point are the concerns about deceased Israeli hostages, bodies not having been returned just yet. That seems to be a genuine, just logistical, practical question because some of these hostages may have been dead early in the conflict or even on that first day, October 7th, 2023. Over the weekend, while President Trump was going to Asia, he's on this trip to Asia right now. He threatened a 48-hour deadline for getting the bodies of hostages home. Now, I think that was just an attempt to try to pressure and sort of put some fire under the feet of elements of Hamas. What I understand is that Egypt is sending personnel to help with that. But there's still a whole host of issues in this first phase, and it's quite fragile because there's not a lot of trust and confidence between these two parties, Israel and Hamas. They see each other in an existential fight against each other, and that's a hard thing to keep together.
The one of and I always mention this is not a peace agreement at this point. It's a ceasefire. We have a
Yeah.
long way to go, and that's one of the things we wanted to talk about here on this session. Um, Yeah, the issue of Hamas, I've seen reports where uh, it could be that there are a lot of autonomous units that they've kind of may have lost any kind of centralized. I I cannot see them disarming. I'm struggling to see any scenario. Can you help me with that?
No, I agree with that. I mean, look, in Arabic, Hamas actually comes from the Arabic words that the name of the movement, Harakat Muqawama Islami. So Haraka is movement, Muqawama is resistance, and Islami is Islamic. So literally, resistance is its middle name, Muqawama. And it built its credibility over decades in armed resistance against Israel. And it built up its weapons supply and arsenal. So there is talk of what some call a DDR program of disengaging these forces and some sort of buyback weapons program. Hard for me to imagine that that will be the case. I think the other issue here is, and again, it's a difficulty, but it's not insurmountable. It just requires investing a lot of resources in the Palestinian territories in ways that maybe America and international communities have not done since the 1990s. When I lived out there in Gaza and West Bank, you had thousands of Europeans, Americans like me, and others working on different facets of Palestinian self-governance and trying to help them boost their capacities. And I think that's another element is that the fact that there's no clear plan, there's still vague plans about what does this international force look like, which countries might come in. I understand in a matter of quite soon, actually, some announcements might be made about which countries might participate in an international security force, excuse me, but it's not clear to me that there's an operational plan yet that defines clearly how the Israel Defense Forces pulls back even further, loosens the grip, which countries will come in, how will they safeguard against the perceptions that they might be seen as some sort of subcontractor to an Israeli occupation? All of these things really need to be sorted out. And that's why I think it was a good thing that President Trump sent 200 of U.S. military personnel, not into Gaza, to be clear, but into southern Israel to establish a joint operating center, a coordinating center to coordinate on all of these different elements because it's quite complicated in a place like Gaza today.
Let's talk a little bit about Palestinian representation. Um, if we, follow the history, that's been one of the real difficult things, different groups vying. I still almost call it the Palestinian Liberation Authority because I'm old. I
Yeah.
remember, but the Palestinian Authority, uh, I've seen with Arafat passing away, Abbas, everything that I see talks about the corruption and really kind of the lack of respect in the Palestinian community. Um, but I understand Israel might have one or two leaders locked up in jail that might galvanize the Palestinian people. What can you tell me about a hope that you actually get somebody that cares about the Palestinians and that they would respect as an authority?
Yeah, well, so first, just quickly on the ABCs, there is still the Palestine Liberation Organization, and it's not old school for you to say PLA as well, because the agreements that Israel signed weren't with the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority was created in the Oslo Accords, and those accords are signed by the PLO, which Arafat headed, and then still to this day, his successor Mahmoud Abbas heads it. So it's still there. It's the negotiating body that's different from the PA, the Palestinian Authority, which is on the
Okay.
ground, because the PLO still assumes that it is the voice of all Palestinians, including those that have been exiled as refugees in places like Lebanon, Jordan, even America. So those distinctions are important, but it's still relevant to say PLO or PLA. Most people say PLO. The PA itself is sclerotic. I don't know if you're familiar with sort of a scenario in America where you have aging leaders who are in their 80s. Do does this sound
Yeah.
familiar to
Yeah.
Americans? That's what Palestinians have as well. And Abbas essentially has been in power for 2 decades. And it's astounding to think that. And there haven't been elections in a long period of time here. So there are a number of voices. You indicated that there's some in jail. one of those voices, and we used to work with him when I worked at the National Democratic Institute in Ramallah and Gaza City. His name's Marwan Barghouti. He's a very famous Palestinian political leader who's in jail for murder. He during the Second Intifada, he was found to have been involved in the murders of Israeli leaders during the Second Intifada, and he didn't get out in this hostage release prisoner exchange deal in early October of 2025. I don't think he's getting out anytime soon, but it sort of doesn't matter because there are any number of people, even Marwan Barghouti, I believe, is in his 60s. There's a new generation of Palestinians who vastly outnumber their older generation, and not to get into some sort of ageist argument, but there's so much talent too. They're very educated, run businesses, high-tech companies, have many of this next generation talent for Palestinians. They know how to run things, right? And sort of a big challenge is A, you got to get the Israeli occupation out of the way, but then B, you've got to get the old guard generation Palestinians to step down and give space to this new generation. And what I think a lot of Americans don't understand is that the vast majority of those Palestinians, that next generation, they're not Hamas supporters. They want something different. They want a basic sense of decency in their lives and for the futures of their children and things like this. And I think there's tremendous opportunity, as crazy that sounds, after 2 years of endless or seemingly endless war. But there's just so much human capital that's quite positive amongst the Palestinians, and they just need the space and the tools to actually create new things.
Um, it makes me think, and boy, that you helped educate me there. Thank you. Um, I guess when I look right now, I see, as you said, Hamas. I've heard there might be more moderate elements after the devastation they took, but there's always going to be that element that Israel doesn't deserve to exist. They need to be driven to the sea, Palestine retaken. You have the extreme Zionist movement in Israel that we need to have the borders reestablished from biblical times. And you have a third element of the those who teach revelations, and we have many Christians giving a lot of support and pressure that we need to have those borders reestablished so that we can have the second coming. You got three forces there that can't accept compromise, and they're very extreme in their views. And I'm thinking of the West Bank right now,
Yeah.
where there seems to be a real movement to take it over by the Zionists, and the government is not doing anything to stop it in Israel.
Yeah.
Your observations.
Yeah, no, those elements, those extreme elements, in many ways, in the Israeli and Palestinian society, and then in global Christian communities, including America, they sort of feed off of each other and fuel each other in their own individual ways. What I'd say is that they're not representative of where the vast majority of Israelis and Palestinians are. And they're causing a lot of the problems. As I articulate in this new report card report that just came out for the Middle East Institute today, that yes, Gaza has been a disaster, but the West Bank itself, which is this territory between Israel and Jordan, north and south of Jerusalem, that is occupied territory by the Israelis. There are millions of Palestinians live there, almost a million Israelis, I believe. The number continues to grow. And those symbiotic sort of extremist voices feed off of each other. But I think by and large, a lot of those forces, if you can get them to sort of push them to the sidelines, there's a moderate vital center, if you will, that actually understands that pragmatically you're going to have to live and live together. It's not the dominant faction in the Israeli government today. It's not the dominant narrative amongst Palestinians, but it could be with a greater sort of representation, freedom, and democracy. What I'll tell you isn't going to happen, I don't think, in my view, is a so-called one-state solution, because it's not a solution. Israelis, especially after October 7th, Israeli Jews, can't fathom welcoming millions of Palestinians in as equal citizens. And I think in a similar sort of way, a lot of ordinary Palestinians living in under occupation, they just want their own governance and their own autonomy. So I think the challenge is, and we don't see it yet from President Trump, though he and his Vice President J.D. Vance have pushed back against the annexationists on the Israeli side, right?
Yeah.
When J.D. Vance visited, you may have seen this in October, about a week after President Trump flew to the Middle East,
Mhm.
the extremist right in Israel had a symbolic vote in the Knesset to call for annexation of the West Bank. And Vance himself criticized that pretty strongly. That's something that is, I think, a move that would further isolate Israel in the region because countries like the United Arab Emirates, which has a deal with Israel, or Saudi Arabia, which doesn't yet, they all insist upon one key thing, a pathway to a two-state solution that means a Palestinian state. So all of those elements, I'm glad you identified them. And I respect the faith of people who are in sort of either of those groups. But what I have less respect for is the attitude that is almost totalitarian, that seeks to dominate the other rather than to accommodate the other, to actually be more flexible in a way that I, raised as a Christian, see Jerusalem and Bethlehem and the holy sites as near and dear to my heart. But I appreciate and respect fully how many Jews and Muslims look to that holy city of Jerusalem as something that is a key part of their religious lineage and heritage. And I think we need more voices like that that are recognizing that there's a shared sort of understanding here, and that it's better to work together rather than have one group try to dominate the other.
As a Christian, I think, that man will neither know the hour or the time, but Christians are always wanting to set the hour and the time in some way as you follow through. I bring it up because when I used to teach, I said this was the frustration, is that the extremist elements really throw a monkey wrench into the moderates. And I think of the Sons of Liberty, who were viewed as a terrorist organization by almost everybody else in the American colonies, and disliked. John Adams defends the British soldiers as a setup, but the government of England, in reaction, created more and more to support. And
Yeah.
that's where I think, October 7th took a lot of moderates out of the picture in Israel. That's my concern, that all they have to do is a terrorist attack, or any of these groups do something. It's hard to keep on track of what you and I are talking about for a solution to the problem.
Yeah, tale as old as time. The spoilers try to spoil, right? I mean, you could plot sort of, you could do a graphic. Maybe we should do that at MBI of when there are advances or perceptions of advances in Middle East peace, there are extremist voices that come out and try to stop that. So I remember living and working over in Jerusalem, and the fall of 1994, 95, excuse me, when Yitzhak Rabin was killed by who? Not a Palestinian terrorist, but an Israeli terrorist who had a very right-wing vision for what his country should be. And I'd submit to you that here we are. It's almost about 20 years later. That vision of that assassin has actually played out better for him than it was for Yitzhak Rabin. So Anwar Sadat of Egypt, he was also killed by extremists. And when you take out leaders in this sort of way, it sets back progress. And that's just with leadership assassinations. You could almost sort of time your watch by it, Don, is that if this ceasefire continues to move forward, and I hope it does, and if there's good work being done to build a multilateral regional framework of support for the Palestinian people, you're going to have some elements of the Palestinian extremist groups, the terrorist groups, or even Israelis who will try to scuttle this intentionally. So you need to build shock absorbers into the system. And the absorbers, I think, come from steady leadership, from leaders that actually are trying to see the bigger picture and keep an eye on the common good. That's what worries me today, here in America, but also in the Middle East, is there's a deficit of true leadership, not chest thumping, bragging over social media leadership, but the quiet leadership that builds trust and confidence among peoples and tells people, okay, it's going to get a little rough here, but we're still going to continue to proceed forward towards some sort of progress towards a sustainable peace, lasting peace.
Yeah, to me, it's you have to be able to turn the other cheek once in a while and not let those extremists get you off your path, which is hard to do if you start to get public pressure, and that's where you say leadership. Well,
Turn the other cheek. Where did I hear that before, Don? Where?
yeah, I mean, and that's hard. It's hard. I mean, you agree.
Yeah,
But if we're going to make progress, you can't let the extremists throw you off track, and that's what they've been able to do so
yeah.
often. So that's the point I kind of wanted to make. Um, let's get into point 15 of the 20 points. The
You're not
United
going to
States.
quiz me on what number 15 is, are you?
Well, I'm gonna go through it here because I don't think anybody else does that may be viewing this. I probably will be wrong, but the United States will work with Arab and international partners to develop a temporary international stabilization force, the ISF, to immediately deploy in Gaza. They'll train and provide support to vetted Palestinian police forces in Gaza and will consult with Jordan and Egypt, who have extensive experience in this field. This will be long-term internal security solution. The ISF will work with Israel and Egypt to help secure border areas along with newly trained Palestinian police forces. It is critical to prevent munitions from entering Gaza and to facilitate the rapid and secure flow of goods to rebuild and revitalize Gaza. A deconfliction mechanism will be agreed upon by the parties. And I wrote, whose troops? The To me, point 15 is the heart of what we're talking about. You have to have security for the Palestinians
Yeah.
for things to move along. And if you don't have security, I can't see Arab nations putting money back in as they did before to rebuild, especially if they are afraid their forces are going to have to fight Hamas from time to time, or that Israel's going to come back in and blow everything up. So, your observations on the ISF and whether these security forces, we can get security into to Gaza.
Well, one thing it's going to need is so much more of a formal coalition or an attempt that's like a coalition. When I hear plans like that, it makes me think of things that have succeeded in the Middle East. And people forget about the success stories and rail on
Mhm.
about the failures like the Iraq War or Afghanistan in 20 years. One success story we've seen in the last 10 years is the creation of an international and regional coalition to fight the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. That was a formal coalition that had the backing. And why I stress this is that those ideas are actually quite good and interesting. They're not dissimilar to what a lot of people had floated during the first year and a half of the war between Israel and Hamas. But they didn't come to fruition because everybody was focused on crisis diplomacy to end the fighting and to get hostages home. Now we're past that Rubicon, more or less. And I think the challenge will be some of the countries that have been named publicly, potentially as part of this. Azerbaijan, Indonesia said that it could send in some forces. It's been named also in the press that different elements in the Gulf, even including Bahrain, but Egypt quite naturally could be part of this. But to me, the main thing I would stress is that the best solution is actually to train a local force in the way that if you look at the model of what we have in the West Bank right now, and few U.S. taxpayers know this, but your taxpayer dollars and mine as well go to support Palestinian security forces and the training of them in the West Bank already, and it's been going on for a decade and a half, almost 2 decades. Um, and we have a military commander the U.S. military commander who works under the State Department, who's on the ground working with Palestinian security forces that are helping secure urban areas, the most populous areas of the West Bank. It's been going on for years. There's been training over the last year or so, the last few months at least, of additional contingents of Palestinian security forces that could go into Gaza. And this training's been conducted in Egypt. Jordan has been a partner in some of these efforts too. It's not talked about that much. Why? because there are elements of the current Israeli government that don't like the Palestinian Authority or don't like the idea of Palestinian security forces with weapons, which I understand. Back to what I said earlier, there's a huge trust and confidence gap. I mean, Israel was invaded and it had 1,200 of its citizens killed, hundreds more snatched, and it was brutal and awful, and that trauma lives on. This is why I think a multilateral effort, and this is a point I make in this most recent report, Don, is that President Trump, on a lot of the things that he does in the world, it is about America first, right? And he touts it, and that's his slogan. And he knocks allies in Europe and Asia off balance quite regularly. But he's muted that approach of unilateralist sort of America first in the Middle East, especially on this file, because he knows it's going to take a team effort. Now, the main thing I'd say here is you really need a number of I was going to say too many chiefs, not enough Indians. I don't know if that's politically correct to say these days, but you need the worker bee types that are working at multiple levels. It can't just be leader to leader to make something like this happen. And another last thing I'd say is that there's a chicken and egg element here. Some of these countries will not go into Gaza with their troops at all. And the most likely scenario, I think, for the next few weeks, months, is a scenario like we see in southern Lebanon, where there really is not a strong presence to oppose Hezbollah. And as a result, Israel continues to conduct strikes where they see threats. And that's what's been happening in Gaza the last couple of weeks. What would be better is that you have this slow, steady progress towards building this international presence that is a glide path to creating a Palestinian self-governing body. Makes sense to me that it would be more like the PA that controls this and Palestinians who live there as opposed to somebody who's from Indonesia, right? In the longer run, I'm talking. So, but
Well,
the other key thing is it's going to take years. This is not weeks, it's not
oh,
months. It's going to take years, not only to secure the place, but then the rebuilding process could take a next decade or so.
well, I've seen 90% either destroyed or damaged. You see the pictures. This reminds me, of the end of World War II with, city after city after city, areas that you've got to remove all the rubble. I mean, this isn't something that's done overnight. It's a long process. That's where I becomes concerned about the different sides that don't want this agreement. How we can keep them from putting damage. The Palestinian people have obviously been through quite enough, and getting the aid in. In the remaining time, I could go on forever with you, Brian, but there were a couple of things that you did mention. I think the biggest is in your report, you talk about the administration over relies on special envoys without sufficient connectivity and support from U.S. national security institutions, resulting in halfway measures and insufficient follow through. To me, it's been very interesting to watch this with President Trump put pressure on Netanyahu that we've not seen. I can't recall any president ever doing. But then you're bringing in envoys who have business interest in there,
Yeah.
and yes, they've built up these relationships to do business with each other. But your point is always that I've observed as well. Where's the meat, the detail? And we saw that in Trump's administration here in the United States. We had a lot of glorious things announced, but then as you went back and researched, a lot of the stuff never really got done or played out.
Yeah.
Um, it's almost like the State Department experts have been excluded from this, and yet they're the ones who do the dirty work behind the scenes that actually get the details on this.
Yeah.
Do you have any hope? I'm struggling to see hope that they will put something in place.
Well, again, I'm not optimistic, but I have hope. And the reason why I have hope is that there are people I know who continue to try to serve in this administration, either as career military personnel. Brad Cooper, we have our top CENTCOM commander is tremendous talent. And thank God he's in that position. Many people underneath him. The point I was making in that report, though, is that you have two main envoys Steve Witkoff, who's the main Middle East envoy, but also happens to play a role on Russia and Ukraine, which is not going very well. Also has a hand in Iran talks and I mean other things, and Tom Barak, who is technically the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, but plays a role in Lebanon and Syria. And they have people around them, and they're very good people, but they're not often connected to the wiring of it all is not synced well
Hmm.
together. And finally, we're about to have a top diplomat in the Middle East named Joel Rayburn, who I think is a decent man, and I've traveled to the Middle East with him before on Middle East Institute delegations. But what you need is even more backfilling. And this is coming at a time, backfilling from US institutions at a time when Doge under Elon Musk or other institutions cut an enormous number of US national security professionals. The fact that we're trying to play a role, the United States, in helping rebuild Gaza with others without having U.S. Agency for International Development, we're sort of unilaterally disarming ourselves at a time when we actually need more resources. And the bigger point is it's not solely about the business deals that Trump and the Trump family and some in the Witkoff family and others make. That's the only problem here. The other problem is that you need institutional latch-ups. If this is, we're talking about a multi-year effort that will last longer than the second Trump administration, right? You need to have, in the way that we built up Europe in partnership with European countries after World War II, you need sort of long-standing institutions and not just leadership figures that come in and do this public relations, strategic communications moves and take credit for things. But then you need that slow and steady progress that while there's not a crisis, while things that are not blowing up, you have people who are just moving the ball up the field steadily and slowly. And I don't see those elements inside of the U.S. government right now at that working level as present as they should be.
Yeah, yeah, and I was concerned when I saw that the I'm still going to say Secretary of Defense because I believe in Congress.
Yeah.
Secretary of Defense Hegseth has said that they can't associate with or talk with experts out of think tanks and so on. It's like everything's getting siloed, more isolated when we need more, integration with, sharing ideas and thoughts and back history.
Yeah, I thought that is a sign of weakness and lack of confidence. What in any sort of good national security apparatus, what you want is less groupthink and more red teaming. People questioning your arguments and whether there's blind spots. And to be frank, they can formally say that they're not talking to the experts, but we talk to them every day. And because the people know on the outside that there's only the people who are working these jobs only have 24 hours a day, 7 days in the week. They're dealing with a world of trouble. And there's so many patriotic Americans. I consider myself one of those who I will make my voice available to somebody who's in a position of power to try to make things better for U.S. national security. And I may vote one way in an election, but I have one president and I have one government and I want it to succeed. And if you don't like what I have to say, you can turn us off. But like what I'm saying is they say that they're doing that, but it's still happening. They're still reaching out to experts, and it's sort of a bit of a show for, I think, parts of their political base that like to say we're sticking it to the experts. And it's sort of funny because then everybody knows it's happening behind the scenes. And even despite that, I think they make some unforced errors simply by I made an example of this, I think, in the recent Iran, which I think Iran is the biggest challenge still across the Middle East. And they made a very big mistake in deluding themselves that the nuclear program and military capabilities of Iran were obliterated, right? They're fixated on this verb obliterated, so much so that they fired a U.S. general who was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, who had an alternative assessment. And, an assessment is an assessment. Not everything has to be politics and be hyper politicized one way or the other. And I would rather listen to an alternative view to make the policy sharper and better, to avoid any blind spots that we might have, because the job of defending the country is much more important than sort of some sort of partisan or ideological political game that anyone wants to play. So it is what it is. Call it Department of War, call it Department of Defense. I don't care, just as long as they're doing their job, keeping us safe.
Well, let me finish on, and like I said, I'm about halfway through what I wanted to talk with you about. I used the novel The Ugly American virtually every year that I taught, and it's so frustrating to see the novel still so relevant today with how our leaders sometimes still act. I You see behind me a lot of books, and this is only a fraction of what I have. And when I constantly read and I believe in, you bring people who've had experiences, who understand the nuances of a country, of an area, of a community, because there are ways to deal with people. You, having lived in Gaza, understand something that somebody who hasn't lived there can't understand how families, tribal, religion, interact. What is the accepted method, which is not the way we would do it here in the United States. I always say you have to see it from their viewpoint, not your
Yeah,
viewpoint.
100%.
So I guess for you to finish, that's your thoughts on who might we get to come in there who have these experiences. You mentioned Whitcock. One thing, every time I hear him talk, I realize he has no concept of the history of the situation he's in. He just, and sometimes you think, well, maybe that's an advantage, but it's frustrating that you're going to make an agreement, I think, that could be bad because you don't understand all of this and you're not listening to experts. But is there a hope that we can get people who understand? Can we bring the Palestinians actually in to help build their own country?
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, there are many Palestinian Americans and Palestinians who live in other countries who run businesses or part of governance and governments around the world. That's great. Look, one thing on Steve Witkoff, I've never met him before. But I was impressed in the 60 Minutes interview he did with Jared
Yeah.
Kushner about his humanity, or at least how he
Yes.
portrayed it as such, where when they were in difficult moments, to relate the story that he told about difficult moments in the ceasefire and the opposition that he was getting from Israeli right-wing extremists and opposition in the negotiating room with Hamas, and the fact that they were talking to a Hamas leader I think also was like a bold stroke, but important to do.
Yes.
And he deployed he talked about the story of the loss of his own son and how devastated he was losing his own son and trying to connect with empathy. And I thought, well, that was quite skillful. And that's something that goes over wherever you're living in the world, whether you're a Palestinian in Gaza or if you're an Israeli. You realize people love their families, and when you have a loss like that, and you can share it and try to tell people we've got to move forward no matter what, how devastating it is, that is good. I think, look, this is where we need creativity in terms of not just Palestinian Americans, but people who've lived over in that area. I'd love to see a return to the sort of support networks that Palestinians were getting inside of Gaza and the West Bank when I lived out there in the 1990s. People forget also that we had a U.S. president travel to Gaza in the late 1990s, President Bill Clinton, and he went there, and it was a historic occasion that I don't think is marked in the memories of a lot of people, including people who worked for the Clinton administration. And that connectivity has power in and of itself, whether it's leaders or human beings who go out there and live and work with others hand in hand in trying to solve problems, as opposed to start wars or foment terror and things like that. And I think there's any number of people, especially after 2 years of devastating war that killed women and children on all sides, they want to move beyond and say, okay, a lesson that we can learn from all of this is we should work together. I'd be willing to be part of some sort of organized effort to do that myself, just because I have a connection out there and I stay in touch with my dear friends like Bassam Nasser, Maher Issa, and others, and they've been through hell. And now hopefully there's an opportunity to clear the pathway for something more positive in their lives. And I think we again, this is where you need an actual plan as opposed to just some sort of public relations about a plan.
And the players, kind of who could be successful, who can kind of bring people together. I also think that you have to do something to keep Israel and other people from helping recruit members to Hamas. You need to be able to sell something that goes against anger, revenge, and frustration and give them some hope. So
Yeah, I
your final
agree.
word.
Yeah, I agree that you can't wait. The best way to defeat your competitors or your enemies is actually through peace and through building progress, right? You can't sequence this. I was at a talk recently that I gave and down in Louisville, Kentucky, and somebody said, "Well, they shouldn't have stopped this war because we needed to kill more people from Hamas." And I just fundamentally disagreed because I think that now is a moment to try to build peace. And in many ways, building peace is more complicated and much more difficult than prosecuting a successful war. And I hope that we can build on what we have here and build coalitions as opposed to fragment our own country on these issues. That's why, Don, I'm glad you're doing this podcast. I'm honored to be a guest on it and hope that people tune in and listen to what you have to say. I certainly will.
Well, I appreciate that. I learned a lot. You've really helped. I think you're one of the most connected source-wise, which is why I wanted to have you on. And I hope someday that we can talk about Qatar and Oman as mediators, because
Yes.
having been to Qatar and met and heard their thoughts, I'll just mention briefly, the Muslim Brotherhood realized, a significant number of them, that the killing and violence wasn't helping. So got more moderated, and Qatar began to help more with schools and so on. I don't know if we'll ever see that with Hamas, but I think there are some beaten down people that have are maybe some of the extremists are thinking of a different way. So,
Yeah.
but I can't thank you enough for joining me. And so this is the conclusion of our very first episode of Learning with Samford. And I'm gonna